Hello, everyone. My name is Jordyn Smith, and I am the voice in the astrologer for this YouTube channel, Nonconformist Conscience. And this is the second episode of this show that I'm starting called the Arcane Astrology Talks, where we talk, well, I get my friends or people who I find fascinating that are other astrologers to come on and talk about things that are arcane in astrology, things that maybe we haven't heard about or isn't talked about that often. And I find that it gives richness and it's really fun to just jam out to astrology in general. And so today I'm here with my friend Martha Alter Hines, who I've known for we were just talking about my son is 7 and I met her whenever my son was like a baby. So we've been kind of on an astrology journey doing our own things. And I have an immense amount of appreciation for her. And I'm really excited to hear her talk today about different planets and their moons, which sounds extremely fascinating. So, Martha, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to learn from you.
Thank you, Jordan. Super happy to be here. And I just always appreciate your heart in particular.
Thank you.
Such a good heart.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really happy to be able to have this conversation.
Me too. I was excited whenever I reached out to you. I have to tell you, I like reached out to Ari and I was like, who's someone? And I had already been thinking about you. I was like, I've caught you on your channel. Of course, I've known you for a while now. And he was like, Martha. And I was like, well, yeah, duh. Like, I mean, I'm gonna hit Martha up. So
Yeah.
yeah, you've done a lot of cool work with the Oort clouds and just I mean, you want to talk about arcane, like the things that people are not talking about, go to Martha's channel, which of course I will post uh in the description. But yeah, Martha's like a great person for this show. So what what planet do you want to discuss their moon first?
Yeah, well, I think given that, both of our backgrounds are in evolutionary astrology, I think the two that jump out immediately are Pluto and Neptune, and actually their interplay together, which is fascinating. And sometime I want to talk to Ari about this actually specifically because um, I really think that when we bring in the moons of Neptune and Pluto, it, I have a lot of things that I feel like we can collectively be feeling into that the moons start to inform my experience of them and my perception of it and what do those relationships mean? Yeah, so there's so much there. So much
I
there.
I just remembered, so I'm like I mean, I'm sure you do some of the same things, but I love to like research on the old message boards and stuff for evolutionary astrology. And I think, I don't know if it was on the old message board or if maybe it was like an old lecture that Jeff Green did where he was talking about Pluto and its moon. Not, it was just a little bit of a blip, but I have a feeling that you might be able to kind of segue into this. He
Yeah.
was talking about how if in evolutionary astrology, when we're looking at the chart, like the soul is Pluto. And when we're looking at the moon in our natal chart, well, that's the ego that the soul is choosing. But the soul has its own ego. So it'll pick different kinds of egos that are a little bit in line with, who it is foundationally. Not that it's separate, but I'm trying to conceptualize this for other people. But I remember him talking about the easiest way to understand this is like when you're looking at Pluto, even through observation, it has its own moon. So it's like the interface between the soul's own ego and then the egoic structure that it will choose in different lifetimes to help, I like to say, get the job done, right? Like since we're emotional and we sorry, I had a thing pop up. since we're emotionally driven. That's how we evolve, is through the emotional body. So I'm fascinated to hear your take on this and also to go more into like the interface of Neptune, its moon, and Pluto's.
Yeah, and actually I have so I teach an astrology 101 course, and it's a year-long course where we incorporate the moons, and so we just had our month on Scorpio, not this month, but last month. Um, and so I can actually bring up some of the slides from that if
Let me
that,
make it. Yes. Here.
yeah,
There you
I
go.
think visuals will help.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm just getting to the part of the slides that will show you what I want to bring. Um, okay, yeah. So Pluto actually has five moons, not one. Um, but the biggest moon is fascinating. Uh, okay, so I wanna, oh, here, let me, okay, I can pull it up now.
Yeah. You should be able to share.
Awesome. See that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna make it bigger. Hello. Why is it not? Weird. Hang on. There we go.
Like you have a different version of Canva than me. I was like, that button's not there.
I know, I don't know where it went. Okay, so here are the moons of Pluto. They're also Pluto, in mythology is Hades, right? The god of the underworld.
Hmm.
And so all of the moons of Pluto, not surprisingly, are named after things relating to the underworld. And so their names are Styx, which is the river Styx, which you have to cross to get to the underworld. Nyx, who is the goddess of night. Um, Kerberos, I don't know how to pronounce that, but anyway, who's the dog, the what is it, the two-headed dog, three-headed
Yeah.
dog of Hades. Um, Hydra, who's the 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 Hydra with the poison and the
Yeah.
you cut off and the heads keep growing. And then so those are the four small moons of Pluto, but then the big one, which is fascinating, is Charon or Charon. And Charon in mythology is the person who takes people across the river Styx, like is the ferryman.
Yeah.
So,
Like
yeah,
the
and then
gondola.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So Pluto, if you think of Pluto and its moons together, it's like a little microcosm of this underworld world.
Huh.
Um, and okay, so this is what is so interesting. Um, hang on. So Charon, okay, so Charon is by far, by far, by far the biggest of those. It is uh it's it it is half the size of Pluto. So originally, yeah, this is like so
Wow.
cool. Like, why don't we ever talk about this? So Pluto originally, I mean, sorry, Charon originally, when it was discovered, was it was debated whether to actually consider Pluto and Charon like like a twin double planet,
Okay.
because they're, I mean, Charon is like half the size of Pluto. So imagine having a moon, like our moon being half the size of Earth. It's like,
Hmm.
what in the world? Um, So it was almost considered like a dwarf planet in and of itself, Charon, but then it was not. But the other thing that's fascinating about Charon is that the the orbit of Charon around Pluto and the length of time it takes for Charon to revolve on its own axis is identical. So what that means is that if you're on Pluto or if you're on Charon and you look up, so let's say you're on Pluto and you see the moon, Charon, it never moves from your point of view
Because it's
because
going with it.
yeah, like they're tidally locked, I think is the way to say it.
Oh, I am already having kind of I'm gonna let you continue on because I don't want to, but I am like, there's a little ping going off in my brain about this.
Yeah, 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 totally. So and then another, yeah, okay, so and here's the a figure of Charon in mythology, right? He's the ferryman who takes people across to the underworld. And which I think even that is really fascinating, is like if I even just think about the mythology of Pluto or Hades, we often kind of instinctively equate it with like some kind of devil figure, but that's just not the case. It's not. That's not what Pluto is. And if I think about Charon, it's like there's something about this energy being almost like a midwifing of people to the underworld, right? Like some kind of
I love
mm,
that.
yeah, helping to soothe the way or bridge the way and have it be like not a scary journey, but just, it's a natural thing that happens and you have
So,
someone helping you.
my thought about the orbital position, and how
Yeah.
you're always going to see it is so often we're taught that the ego or the moon in the natal chart is separate from the soul, Pluto. Now
Mm,
imagine if just that through observation, right? Like because it's natural law. If the moon of the soul, Pluto, is traveling with it, it's almost as if it's not separate, right? It's
mm,
like, yes, like technically it is because it's out in space, it's not sitting on top of it, but it I think it's like kind of this reminder of that this isn't separate, that it's
mm.
both and it should be a symbiosis. And then when you're thinking of Charon and like um what you're speaking to, it's like I love that this moon is named this because maybe this is reflecting and indicating how we're supposed to journey back to this place of understanding that there's really not a separateness.
Whoa, I
That's what
love.
came to mind whenever you were talking about
Mhm,
this. So, okay.
mhm.
That's why I was like, something's going off in my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I love that. That's
okay.
beautiful.
But I don't want
Um,
to keep going because this is fascinating to me.
yeah, I mean, and just to briefly, give a sense of the other moons, just this is, the goddess Nyx, who's one of the smaller moons, and she's this primordial energy. She's one of the first deities to exist in Greek mythology. Um, so again, it's like this primal kind of feeling. And Hydra, and I won't go into all because I think Charon is kind of the one I wanted to
Yeah.
really, really give you a sense of. Um, but wait, there was one other point. Where is this? There's this other thing I want to show you that's so fascinating. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, so here's Pluto in the center. Can you see this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, here's Charon. So you can see how from Pluto and Charon are tidally locked, right? So they
Yeah.
from each other's vantage point, they never move, even though they're both constantly moving,
Yeah.
right? That's just so interesting in and of itself. And then you have these other four moons, including this one. The purple one is Hydra. So Hydra again is the
You cut a head off, another one happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And look at what it's doing, like
Yeah.
actually physically. It's like going crazy. It's just so fascinating. And what I read on NASA.gov is that Hydra spins so fast that if it were going any faster, it would just like kind of blow up,
Yeah.
which kind of fits with the image of the Hydra
It
itself.
would split into many pieces, many heads. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I feel like there's so much here so a lot of what I do and the way I approach astrology, again, it's rooted in the Ari Moshe Wolfe version of Jeffrey Wolf Green EA.
Totally.
Ari was my main teacher for a bunch of years, and I love it and I appreciate it. And then I've had Uranus sitting on my Jupiter in my ninth house, if that tells you anything, right? So my Jupiter's at 24 degrees of Taurus in my ninth house. So I've been having this like unbelievably Uranian journey of what it is for me to be a teacher or whatever you want to say, and my own understanding of how I even approach all these things.
We
So
have
one of the
the same. I have Uranus sitting on my Jupiter too.
Oh, you do? Oh, we have the same Jupiter.
Mine's 26 degrees Taurus, but in the first house,
Right.
retrograde. Yeah, I forgot
I
about that too.
That's awesome.
So, and here we
Um,
are doing this conversation.
exactly. So, yeah, one of the things that's really important to me in the way I'm holding everything is that I feel like astrology is really trying to rebirth itself through us, like through everyone.
Hmm.
And um and that our bodies and our beings really know, like we are made of the same things that we're made of, the cosmos, right?
Hmm.
And so there's so much here that we haven't really sat with. Like we tend in EA, it tends to be very mental. It tends to be very much in the mind and like very analytical, especially,
Very
I mean, our
Virgo.
very,
Yeah.
oh, okay, interesting. Yeah. Um, and and I appreciate that to a point, but I feel like it misses things like this. Okay, like if we just sat here and like really felt this, and one thing I do in my courses is I channel guided journeys to the planets, so we actually are like with the being itself because it's a being. It's like it
Everything
really
is sentient.
everything is
Yes.
alive. Yeah, it's really there, and I think when we just look at a chart, we forget that this there's actually a real planet there,
Yeah.
with all these moons. And so if we just sit with this, there's so many layers that I feel like collectively, like there's a co-remembering that needs to be happening collectively in the astrology world. And that's a huge component of what I'm holding space for. But like, I mean, if I just sit with this, even this, it's like, okay, wait, so we've got on the inside Pluto. Next, we have Charon, which is tidally locked like that. Then we
Mhm.
have these three who are kind of like moderately
When
doing
occasionally
stuff.
I've watched they'll all align.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
I've seen it I think twice now. Not never Hydra though.
yeah, exactly. So then that's what I was about to say, right? Then if you think about this, it's like, okay, then you have Hydra going insane on the outside. Like
Hmm.
even that's just like, huh, what's that about? Like chaos. There's chaos holding the space for the whole thing. Which if I just think about it for half a second, it's like, well, that's kind of an interesting reflection on what it is to do an underworld journey. Like if you've, anybody and all of us who've had Pluto transits, I mean, which is all of us,
Yeah.
we know what that feels like, and it can feel kind of like this.
You're getting tossed up in the ocean for sure in outer space.
Right?
You're like, I don't know what's going on, but something is, and I want to figure it out, but I can't.
But if you go deep, 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 deep down into the center, then you find this, right? Or this thing that's like unwavering, which is your soul,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Anyway, I just think like I don't have answers. It's more kind of like I feel like in at this moment in astrology, I just want to be one of the voices saying, "Hey, there's so much more that we have not even begun to remember
Great.
about, you know."
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, so because of like doing this show, like I said, I'm like asking people who do you feel like would fit in, or and I'm going and I'm really getting outside of my little bubble. I think sometimes we tend, not you, because I feel like your work so much is about being in groups of other astrologers, bringing other people's voices, up into the light of day, or, just you're very kind of eclectic in that approach. It's very, okay, I'm going to say your chart. It's very Saturn and Leo in the 11th. And again, your
Mhm.
sun, which I hope, Martha, you don't mind. Martha
Yeah,
has
no,
the
no.
sun in Pisces in the 7th, and we were just talking about this beforehand, but it's very much like um one for all and all for one, like that's that Saturn and Leo in the 11th house to me, and you throw in it's ruled by a sun in Pisces. But for me, I'm like, okay, but I want to get out of my little, I've got Taurus rising. I want to get out of my little bubble a little bit. And so I've been watching different astrologers, and I came across this video of Adam Gainsbourg, and he very much was talking about doing the sky astrology and like, thinking about embodying astrology through looking at it. And then that to me makes me think of like my grandma was indigenous. And so it makes me think of the things that she taught me growing up, which was very much that, you know, observation and feeling into it and seeing what it's, even as a little kid, like if you ever watched Pocahontas, I mean, I'm born in 89, so, but like, I, Mother Willow teaching Pocahontas, what to, all of these things. I feel like what you're talking about is very much, it's rooted in that naturalness. It's what you're talking about, rebirthing or re-becoming one is something that you say often. It's kind of what I know you to, for is that. And it's that everything is sentient, everything can teach us something. And so I think that you're onto something whenever you're looking at those moons. And also, yeah, why isn't it being talked about? Like, it's almost like, okay, we jumped out of whatever and we found astrology and it felt like a brand new big world. And then it's like, oh, what? But wait, there's way more layers to this than what we even thought. And so that is fascinating. And that is very Uranus traveling through your ninth house on your Jupiter, my friend. Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah,
Yes,
I
it is.
love it.
Do you want me to bring up Neptune too?
Yeah, I have another thought about those
Yeah.
moons too
Yeah.
before we
Yeah.
go on. So there's a couple of things that kind of came to my mind as I'm so glad you gave that visual, by the way. Like it was just great. Which is the planets relate to chakras. I don't even know if I'm going to make sense right now. But whenever I was looking at that, it kind of reminded me of that journey of like going through um the root chakra, and going up the spine to get to the other chakras. That's what those moons were reminding me of, right? Where the root chakra, we think of it as like really fixed often and like stubborn. It kind of gives off fixed energy vibes, but fixed energy can be quite chaotic.
Mhm.
It's like fixed energy creates chaos sometimes, to get it unfixed, to get it reminds me of that book, Go On Yourself. You know what I'm talking about? I'm like, that's a root chakra, excuse me, but I'm like, I don't know. Um, but that's that Hydra spinning around is like the kind of trying to bust up that root chakra to get to that center is something that came to mind with that. And then also just that journey of remembering that we aren't, you know, who I am is who I am on a soul level, you
Mhm.
know? And this version of me is just the evolving version of my soul. And so to really ground into that and to think about and to be like, good job, girl. Like you're here, you're doing it, Like you get why things are placed a certain way in your chart, but it is ultimately to get back to like recentering yourself. That somehow, we hear all the time, I think, in like spiritual communities, like kind of new agey groups, I would say, um, which I love. Like, I don't want it to come across as me being judgmental or anything, because you can consider this very new age, right? But it's like you hear that leveling up or that language of you're being low vibrational or high vibrational or in your ego. And it's like, no, that's all that same thing. Like, it's just, do you know what I'm saying? Like, eventually, this is why I like to tell people there's more than one way to get to Denny's. Like,
Mhm.
you go through that, but that's still at the core right there. And you're just, you know what I'm saying? It's not separate. Like, this is the journey, It is the soul's journey. It has nothing to do, well, I don't want to say nothing, but the ego or this is not separate. And that visual really kind of to me reflects that. And then
Mhm.
like yeah, the chakras. So I don't know if that
Mhm.
feels accurate for you, but I was watching. I was like, oh man, very cool. So yeah, we
Yeah.
can move on unless you have something to add to that.
Well, just mainly what I'm reflecting on that's really, really, really important to me in the way that I want to engage with astrology, but just life
Yeah.
is I also I also know that in most traditions in astrology, but kind of everywhere, right? We've had this top-down way of learning, and like Jeffrey Wolf Green is the person who knew the thing and wrote the books, and now we need to duplicate exactly what he believed and make sure
Sure.
we're exactly getting it right in his way.
Yeah,
I no. So that's a big no for me.
I get
Um,
that.
and I personally, as a teacher, can't stand the thought of holding spaces like that where my students need to precisely like replicate my way or something.
Yeah.
So what I'm loving about hearing you is that it's really demonstrating exactly why I think it's so crucial that we don't engage like that. Because as I'm sitting with that image, I might notice one thing, like Hydra going crazy around the whatever. And then you're picking up on all these other things. And then, when I'm holding the spaces with my I don't know what to call them, students, people,
Yeah. No.
um, then this like wisdom emerges from every single one, and
Each
it's a
person.
different angle. Yeah. So there's these, I feel like they're divine puzzle pieces that are needed through every single one of us. And we get really disempowered, I think, in that more of that top-down structure way of learning or being taught or teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like our voices can get really squashed. And I've definitely had those experiences myself in astrology classes where I'll say, what's coming through for me is da da da, and then the teacher goes, uh, like they don't even know how to respond because it's this whole other paradigm, which is
Yeah.
now all the work I'm doing. Like now I am holding my own courses that are that other paradigm, but
Yeah.
they didn't have to engage with it because they're more in that fixed like white male dominated way
Yes.
of being. And it's like, yeah, but we don't really want that anymore, do we? Come on.
No.
Seriously? I
No.
don't. I know that I
No.
don't.
It
Yeah.
well, it's the stringent. Yeah, it's to me, it's almost like gatekeeping information a little bit, but not in like the sense that you think that it, like the traditional sense of what gatekeeping is. It's like almost gatekeeping, or I don't know if that's kind of the sense, but it's more of like hoarding, like this is the only way to do this, this is the right way, and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, there can be foundational things, but I
Yeah.
also feel like, I mean, I mean, this is funny because we're talking about how our Jupiters are conjunct right now. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
like, there's more than one way to get to Denny's or like, McDonald's, whatever you want to say, Walmart, who cares? But it's like, well, every single one of us is on our own evolutionary path, and we each have something to bring to the table. Each one of us has our own wisdom. And if we're
Yeah.
talking about reincarnation, we're also talking about Taurus, Jupiter and Taurus, there are innate gifts that each one of us have from prior life efforts that why am I going to diminish this in this area? Now, sometimes whenever I feel like if I'm in a group setting and someone's projecting or something, I'll be like, no, like that's not really what
Yeah.
I'm seeing.
Yeah.
But whenever it comes to a different way, I just tutored a girl who is very eclectic and pretty much only uses whole sign and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, let's work with this. Like, how do we want to do this? It was like, um, but do you want to know what I learned from her, which I loved? Because I always feel like whenever you're teaching, we're kind of going off into little places, but I love that this opened this up is that I find that when I'm teaching, I learn as much from my students as I hope I give to them. There is a reciprocation, I feel like that happens, and it's not transactional, it's just natural. So she was talking to me about how she was like, well, whole signs I use for looking at elemental things. And porphyry I view for past life things, whereas placidus, I almost look at it like a progression in a lens. And I was like, oh, I could actually see what she was saying, how she used them differently. And this is someone who has a South Node in Gemini, and like I was like, this is amazing. That's a really cool way of thinking about it. So I agree with you. There's always wisdom whenever I do things with, I guess, yes, calling them students feels weird, right? Like just a little bit. Um, but whenever I do like a class or something and someone says something maybe about their own chart or about something that they're seeing, I I always learn from it because archetypes are vast and wide. Like, how am I going to know everything?
And yeah, I will say yes, and like you kind of started to say that there are some things, there are some parameters that also do need to be in place. Like it's not just a free for all.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it's really important to me to teach the foundation of the EA way so that it's there very solidly. But
Mhm.
then, given that structure, it's like, yes, and, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, and, but there's so much, and there's so much here, and there's so much that your soul knows that, the EA structure can't, it's like, it's impossible to know everything just from
Well, I think
one way. Yeah.
okay, I just have to say, let's look at the coincidence of how we started off with Pluto and the moon, and this is becoming like this discussion, and I freaking love it. Which, for
Mm.
anyone who knows about EA, it is based around Pluto. But I think
Yeah.
that that's like what we're talking about is, well, we were even kind of having a conversation. I'm not going to get too much into it, but before we came on, where it was like sometimes people are wanting to view astrologers as these authorities. And it's like so much of my work that I feel like I do with my clients that I can't tell you how, like, this is the thing that I think that I say the most to clients is you need to trust yourself. What is
Mhm.
your inner voice telling you? Like, because I feel like, and again, Jupiter and Taurus, like, like how that's inside of you. Your intuition can kick in. What do you need to throw off? Like, um, not giving your authority away. And even in like settings within astrology, it's not, yeah, you don't want to get to where you parrot people or you are not being able, it just becomes a formula. Which
Yes.
for EA, the thing that I think is great that Jeff Green did was it was the first time that someone did do something in a very Virgo Scorpionic like way, was very much had, a way of you want to learn astrology, here's this. You can approach it this way. It was like the first, it was very progressive for its time. This is how you approach it. You go to Pluto first, then you go here, and then you do this. And he also had the planetary method. It was the first time I think that astrology could become more accessible to people if they were really wanting a foundation on how to learn it. And I think as teachers, it's cool to be able to teach people that. But I love what you're saying because it is, I think I see this a lot. Like I was just asked to turn in um something for a conference. And was asked, and it was, they were like, it's because it's becoming dominated by this genre of astrology and we want it more diversified because they didn't want people to have just this type of astrology for people to get botched into it. I hope I'm making
Mhm.
sense here.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah. If I bring in Neptune, that might just add one more layer.
or confuse me. No, I'm kidding.
Uh,
It's Neptune.
oh,
No, bring in Neptune. I'm kidding.
okay, cool. Because it's super fascinating how the Neptune stuff interacts with Pluto.
Right? I love
Yeah.
this.
It's
I'm like
real.
so fascinated by this.
Okay, so obviously we know Pluto is the furthest out of our quote unquote the typical planets in astrology, right?
Right.
And then um Neptune is the next one in.
Hmm.
Okay, so one thing that is really interesting about Neptune and Pluto in terms of their relationship with each other is that Pluto has a 20-year period where it crosses the orbit of Neptune, and it actually comes closer to
Oh no. I didn't know if that was you or me. And then I was, oh my gosh. Okay. Back to
I
it.
don't think, yeah, we're okay. Well, anyway, so um,
The
let me
last thing
get.
I heard was you said that um Pluto will pass into the elliptic of Neptune, the orbit, because Pluto's on an elliptic. I mean, I'm kind of putting my own words, but same.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, no, not okay. Yeah. So, what it is that Pluto's orbit
Mhm.
around the sun crosses the orbit, goes inside of. So we think of Pluto as being farther away from the sun than Neptune,
Yeah.
right? But there's actually 20 years out of the whatever 248 years of Pluto's orbit where it's actually closer to the sun than Neptune gets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. So Pluto's orbit is not always, outside of Neptune's orbit. It's actually
Yeah.
it crosses it.
Into it.
And so
Okay.
that
Which I knew that
yes.
Pluto has a wonky, it's on an elliptic, right? Because it's not, um, it's on like a tilt, right? So that's why it does
It's not
that.
it, I don't think that's why it does that, but it is on a tilt and it is a highly
Yeah, it kind of
elliptical. Yeah.
zigzags. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has anyway, it's part of the Kuiper belt, so
Yeah.
it does it's not on the plane of the ecliptic, and it's also very
That
elliptical.
it's elliptic. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
word that I was looking for.
Yeah. Um, so anyway, the last time that Pluto crossed inside of the orbit of Neptune was from 1979 to 1999, which includes you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And includes lots and lots of people in our I was born in 1977, so I'm barely not in that, but lots of people in our kind of general age range
Yeah.
would have been born during that time, which I think is really interesting. So that's from mid Libra. So if people are listening and they have their Pluto from kind of mid Libra to early Sagittarius, so the
Mhm.
entire Pluto and Scorpio generation has their Pluto in inside the orbit of Neptune.
Okay, that is fascinating. Yeah, and why
Yeah,
is this not being talked about?
exactly. Why is this not being talked about?
Why is
Yes.
this not being talked about?
Yeah. Okay. So then next, when we bring in Neptune's moons, this gets even more interesting because, okay, so here's Pluto's, like you were talking about, that Pluto's orbit is on this sort of tilt.
Yeah.
This the blue circle is the ecliptic, right? The
Yeah.
plane of orbit of the main planets around the sun, including the Earth, up to Neptune. But then once you start getting into the Kuiper belt, which includes Pluto,
Mhm.
then the Kuiper belt objects are like at this funny tilt. Okay. Um, but you can see here, here's the out on the outside of the blue is the orbit of Neptune, and it's in this little section um, where Pluto goes inside of that orbit of Neptune.
Yeah.
And you were born
1989.
right here. You
Yeah.
were born right.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Really fascinating.
Okay, so that's fascinating to me because whenever I think about this, like the 1988 to 1993ers, we have that Neptune Saturn conjunction. You know what I'm talking about? That you see so often. Well,
Mm.
I do because it's, you know,
Yeah, I don't have a ton of clients who are like right around your age, so you're
well,
probably way
I
familiar than
actually
me.
don't. All of my
Oh,
clients, not all of them, I think it's my Capricorn that I typically, most of my clients are Pluto Leo, Pluto Virgo, and a little bit of
yeah.
Pluto Libra. I think I
Yeah,
can
same,
count
same.
on one hand how many
Mhm.
Pluto and Scorpios I get. Like that's very,
Yeah.
very rare. But I know
Yeah.
this because of being fascinated with that dynamic of because I have Uranus, Saturn, Neptune conjunction. So I also
Mm.
have this Okay, so let's talk about Neptune for people for a
Yeah.
second here.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, do you want to, how about you give your spiel on it and then I can kind of fill in if we're talking about Neptune from like an astrological perspective. I feel like, hello, Sun and Pisces, you're a great person to be talking about this. I feel like it's one of the most misunderstood planets, right?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, I can give the rundown, but I want to get to Neptune's moon because that'll bring in like a different
Okay,
element. But if,
okay,
yeah, just go back to the beginning of Neptune itself. So Neptune, Neptune, where are you? Okay, yeah, Neptune in astrology, right?
right.
It typically is talked about like this. It's our connection with the divine associated with, you know, uh, the dissolving into the nothing and the everything. Obviously, it's associated with Pisces. It can be associated with bliss and opening to like having big spiritual awakenings, but it can also be associated, as we know, with illusion, disillusionment, delusions, addiction, um, especially I think like addictions to alcohol and opioid, things that kind of like where people feel like they're bliss, quote unquote, blissing out or losing themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and there can be like this idealism or being very naive if you have really strong Neptunian energies. I mean, what else? What am I forgetting? Is there other sort of typical ways we talk about Neptune?
Yeah, I would say if you are wanting to know like the natural way to spiritualize in your chart, Neptune is like a really great place to look. Neptune Pisces, your 12th house, that can tell you a lot. That was like a great way for me to like view it, especially, I've dealt with addictions and things. That's what I was going to say. A lot of people in my generation that have that Neptune Saturn conjunction deal with that. And think about if you're extremely sensitive and I mean, I don't think that this is everyone across the board, but you're wanting to like, maybe you grew up like me in a very conservative area, Neptune and Capricorn, and you're
Mm,
having these experiences and you're out in nature and then you get thrust into a city or something. It's like you don't want to have to, it becomes almost painful to deal with what's going around. And so, um, for me, I can talk about this a little bit. And I'm going to tie this into what you were talking about with that being in Neptune, because I have little things going off. Um,
mm,
but it's like Neptune is so sensitive. It's like pure emotion. When we think of something in the chart as pure emotion, we're thinking of Neptune. We're thinking of Pisces, the 12th house. And so you can be extremely sensitive to things. And if you're not wanting to feel or have that experience because you're being told that's not okay or this or that. I think there's a lot of people with like the Neptune Saturn conjunction. I don't want to overgeneralize, but I've seen it so often with friends and things like that, that it's like you just want to escape, not necessarily spirituality, but the and I'm thinking specifically that Neptune conjunct Saturn in 1989, when we looked at that chart, that's where that's at, is Neptune conjunct Saturn in the sign of Capricorn. And so it's
mm,
like you're trying to, if 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 Neptune and Pisces is feeling everything, well, Capricorn is like putting a container on it, like trying to kind of suppress this. And so um I find that a really fascinating association that you just saw of, that being in the ecliptic or the orbit of Neptune. It's if we're looking at this just through observation and correlation, and we're seeing that a lot of people in 1989 have issues with addiction. A lot of them are extremely hypersensitive. I also think a lot of people with Pluto and Scorpio with that conjunction in their chart are really rooted in like I think of people who like co-ops and sharing of resources and stuff, but then they're coming into a structure of reality, Capricorn, where it's like, no, there needs to be elitism and this and this. And so it's just like this smashing down of this more natural, pure emotion is kind of the way that
mm,
does this make sense?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. this is kind of the way that I was looking at this is like, oh, wow, that's fascinating for those people because um yeah, it's like also, okay, this is coming into my mind. I love hanging out with astrologers. Think about how Neptune Pisces is like the cosmic womb, right?
Mhm.
And what if you're just like out there and all of a sudden you're having to come into this structured form? And maybe it's been a lot of lifetimes that you haven't had to do that. And now you're born with Pluto in Scorpio 1989, but your Pluto at the time of your birth was in the orbit of, Neptune. And
Mhm.
so then it makes me think of that Pluto and the moon visual of maybe it's about having to really learn how to work within this structure and still be connected to that and not lose the essence of it.
Wow, I love that.
You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
anyway,
I feel, yeah, like for someone like you happens to be born in 1989, like this
yes.
visual would be so fascinating to just be with for a while.
No,
Because,
it is. That's why I'm like, oh my God, I could sit and talk to you about this for forever.
right, like it literally shows, okay, in 1989, Pluto was here in Scorpio, inside the orbit of Neptune, while Neptune was over here in Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right? And just like, what does that feel like? Anyway, there's so much, so much there. Um,
Yeah,
is it okay if I put in the moon of the moon?
absolutely. Yeah, I love these visuals. They're helping me connect dots, I feel like.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so Neptune has rings and moons. Okay, so I'm not going to get into the rings, but they are really interesting. But in terms of its moons, this brings in Pluto in a fascinating way. Okay, Neptune has 16 main known moons, and but its largest one by far is Triton. So Triton's the one I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
So here's Neptune, and then here are the main 15 moons, and then you can see here is the orbit of Triton. So it's a very different, right? Like all these 15 ones are inside, closer into Neptune and kind of making this sort of similar-ish orbit around
Mm-hmm.
Neptune. And they're all of these moons, the main one, that means sorry, the 15 ones are going around Neptune in a counterclockwise way, which is kind of the typical way. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but Triton, which has this very, very different orbit around Neptune, is going
Yeah.
clockwise the
Yeah.
other way. Like, so you can tell immediately, okay, wait, Triton, just on a physical astronomical level, clearly is something different than these other moons, right? Like that's just
Mm-hmm.
yes. Okay. So now, um, here is what Triton looks like. And the very first time I looked at this, I was like, that looks a lot like Pluto. Because it
Yeah.
was like if you see the photos of Pluto, I mean, it looks like this, except Pluto has that heart shape here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then I started doing research on, the NASA website, and it said, well, yeah, that's because actually, Pluto and Triton are composed in a very, very similar way, and 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 Triton is actually really large. It's larger than Pluto,
Oh my God.
first of all. Um, and it is three-quarters the size of the Earth's moon, so it's quite large. And it's thought to originally be a Kuiper Belt object, just like Pluto is. So it's almost like Neptune has a a sibling of Pluto as one of its moons.
Which to me makes sense. Um, when we're thinking of how Neptune is the consciousness, like within someone's chart, right?
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
if we're thinking like, okay, if this is like, I mean, whenever you said that it was made of the same things, I was thinking that maybe that it was like Pluto had a big bang or something, and this is something that spun off of it. I don't know. I'm not,
Mhm.
an astronomer. I don't.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't think anybody knows. Yeah.
yeah, but I was thinking about how, you know, our soul is pure consciousness. So if Pluto is indicative of the soul, um, why wouldn't its consciousness be just as big as the soul?
Cool. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that they would do this dance together, right? So it's like Pluto
Yeah.
has 20 years where it goes inside the orbit of Neptune, and then Neptune has this moon that's like a sibling of Pluto, right? So they're both
Yeah.
kind of
Interfacing. That's also, to me, indicative of how consciousness is reincarnating, right? You're coming
wow.
in and out of worlds is kind of that your consciousness is coming into a new structure, which is in a new structure, right? And to me,
Wow.
that's like indicative of that,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. That's beautiful.
So,
I love.
yeah, so it's like the soul Pluto can be out doing, and occasionally it has to, the consciousness, it, the soul has to evolve. And so the consciousness has to go into another form, into another place. So it's just, I think, reflecting that journey of the consciousness, one, evolving, Pluto,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
two, um, our consciousness, whenever we pass in this physical body, we're on a different plane of existence. And so it's
Mm.
also speaking to that journey of dipping into this plane of existence and then reincarnating and going into this plane of existence. That's kind of what I get from that. I don't, you know.
Ah, I love that. Again, I feel like we could just sit with this for like a week
I
and
know. I'm so glad that I asked you to talk, and I asked you, what do you want to talk about? Because yeah. And you were like, well, I think that the moons are really fascinating. I was like, okay, let's do it. What a happy little treat for me and hopefully for others.
yeah. Well, and I just want to say one last thing, which is in
Yeah.
terms of the mythology of Triton, I think is really interesting and adds more layers, right?
Okay.
So Triton is the son of Neptune. Okay, which makes sense because it's the main moon of Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's a Greek god of the sea who's half human, half merman. And he has this conch shell. He's well known to like hold this conch shell, and he's the messenger god of the sea. So kind of like Hermes or
Yeah.
Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know, you could think of him kind of like he's part of a, you know, bridging worlds or
I think
the
of
communicator.
Chiron too a little bit because it's,
Definitely.
you know, um,
Yes.
yeah, the bridging of worlds for sure.
Mm,
I always
right?
find that these kind of mythological, uh, I don't want to say creatures, but characters, right, are indicative of, to me, the most natural things that exist typically. Whenever I'm like discovering something about an asteroid or something, if it's like a deva or it's, a centaur or something, to me, I usually find like a lot of meat in there. Like as far as the bridging, it's something that's always indicative or reflective to me of like how we're all sentient and we're all interconnected, right? Like, aren't we all half something? Like, we just
Mm,
maybe don't know
totally.
it. I don't know.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I even like the thought of just even comparing Triton with Charon. Like they're both, there's something about both of them. They're bridging worlds, they're Charon brings you a
yes.
river Styx. So there's both
And
of them, there's this,
and
yeah,
this is
water.
as you're going through the river of Styx and you're being guided, you also have something that's helping you to receive the messages in order to
Oh,
have that journey, to have
right?
that
Yes. Oh
experience. Oh, I
my
have
God.
chills. Okay.
So
Yeah.
do I.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just so much here. I mean, so much. Um, yeah, and then it just to really briefly say this is the mother of Triton, who is the wife of Neptune, and so it's Salacia, and Salacia is one of the Kuiper Belt objects out there with Pluto, right? So it's like that's interesting too. Just
Yeah.
And I've done talks on Celestia. There's so much, so much we could talk about with that. Um, but yeah, I think that sums up um the gist of that. Um,
I,
yeah.
Martha, thank you so much. I just appreciate you. Yeah, I love whenever I can jam out with other astrologers or, you're talking a similar language, but maybe I don't know, it's individualistic. It's what you were talking about earlier, like how each one of us has these kind of things that pop into our own consciousness. And why wouldn't we
Mhm.
bring this up? Because this is cool. And what do you think about this? And what do you think? So I will be like really interested if people comment on this and what they comment about and maybe what they see. So people who are viewing this, if you have something that you thought of as Martha was introducing us to this, because this was an introduction for me for sure. I'm wondering what your thoughts were on it. Like, I want to hear about what came to your mind and what maybe you're connecting with archetypally, because I think so much of Martha's work is to help us and to remind us that we are connected. I mean, I
Mhm.
feel like I do this too, but I don't vocalize it necessarily in the same way that you do, you know? And so I want to carry that message, uh, that you have to these people who are watching this. So please say what comes to mind in the comments and have it open for discussion. I think that it would really, really be cool. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah, that's
just,
exactly it. I would love to hear too.
yeah,
Definitely.
thank you. And Martha, before we leave, is there anything coming up for you that you want to let people know about or yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I actually happen to be starting my next year. So the astrology course I teach is a year long, 13 months long, and it's the next round is starting in February 2025. So it's perfect timing. If this way of exploring astrology, like really from the soul out, is
Yeah.
speaks to you, then join us. And yeah, I would love, 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 love to have people join who are really wanting this way of being with it. The astrology from the EA perspective, but include then bringing in the astronomy and the soul level embodied piece and the actually traveling to these beings and being with them and letting them inform us and us really honoring that they are. It's like I think of it often if you go to like a redwood forest or the sequoias. I live in California, and
Mm-hmm.
these beings are massive and they are ancient. And if that's true about these trees, then hello, like, it's
Yeah.
clearly about the planets.
Yes.
Um, Everything in our cosmos, right? And we don't really remember that, I think, a lot of the time. Um, yeah, so I wouldn't really want to be sitting there just like talking about a sequoia and ignoring the fact that no, wait, it's actually right there and it's alive. And maybe if I go and sit and be quiet for a little while, with it, I'll suddenly feel or remember so much more than I would if I was like reading a book about what a sequoia is. It's
Oh,
like,
I like
and both
that
are
you're talking
important.
about
Both are,
direct experience and also the word that came to mind as you were talking about this truly was the word reverence. Is
yet
having
that,
reverence,
yeah,
you know?
ex- and having reverence for ourselves. So a lot of what I also talk about, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but the biggest thing of my work, I would say, is actually not even astrology. It's more about holding space for the reality that uh to to um to have reverence for life and ourselves and this ancient wisdom that we each literally are. And it's been we've been taught to forget it. We've been taught that we aren't important, that our voice doesn't matter, that our intuition definitely doesn't matter.
Yes.
All these things, right? And then we've been taught to basically look up to one main teacher or guru or authority figure and just regurgitate that thing, whatever that is.
Yep.
Um, and we've forgotten that no, 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 we have deep ancient wisdom right here, and we have a voice, especially those of us who were raised as girls, our voices have been not encouraged and not supported. And
I
yeah,
legitimately, it's why I've done so much work on the asteroid Cassandra. Is it's very prominent in my chart, and that is something that I feel like I've been recovering so much of
yeah.
in this life. And I also feel like, um, yeah, I just want to commend you and give you a pat on the back for not that you need it or you want it at all, but for it's like when you were telling me like you have a good heart, it's like awkward, like oh, because that's how me and you are, it's like oh, it feels well, at least me, I'm like that's so nice, but also I I don't know. I think also as women, you're not used to hearing those things, right?
Mm.
Good job or unless it's performative, right? It's something that it's not about like, no, this is something that everyone should be experiencing, right? It's not about that. It's so I wanted to say, I think that people who definitely like what you were talking about and want to have something of an experience like me and you just had, that they should head your way for sure.
Yes, so in February I'm starting the Astrology 101 again, and then in April I'm going to be starting a new course. So the 101 I've done already once, and so it'll be the second time I'm doing it.
Hmm.
But in April then I'm starting a whole new course called The Stars Speak, which is going to be it's going to be held in a really similar co-remembering way, but regarding the stars and the constellations. And that one is going to have four guest speakers, uh, who are Heather Ensworth, Julia Balaz, Divine Harmony, Kaylin Castell, and Chris Skidmore. So people who like really, really know the star stuff.
Yeah,
And for Chris really, really knows the mythology stuff. Um, and yeah, so if you're interested in like kind of learning or I would say relearning astrology from the soul inside out, astrology 101 would be perfect. And if you're like, oh, I really want to like go into the stars and who are the stars and how do I connect with the stars and
yeah.
the constellations, and have a very direct relationship with them, then the stars speak would be awesome, perfect. And some
That
people are doing, yeah,
sounds amazing, like truly amazing. I love it.
really excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I love that. Well, okay.
Thank
Again, we
you.
could talk for forever. Thank you. This was just so much fun. I feel like my Venus and Sag, like the little kid in me that I fill with my Venus and Sag. I know that's kind of
Mm,
a Leo theme, but I fill it with Sag too. I feel like it's
yeah.
come out. Like I'm like, oh, new, like something. Ah, I don't know. I really appreciate you bringing this work and being open to talking about it, especially whenever I reached out. You didn't even hesitate. You sounded
Yeah.
excited, and I appreciate it so much. So thank you.
Well, again, yeah, I appreciate you and your heart and your genuineness and your openness and curiosity, and just you have a just pure purity, like truly. Really, really, really. So
Well,
thank
thank
you.
you for reflecting that back to me because I don't always feel
Mhm.
it. Okay, let's get off of here. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.